All right, so welcome to the podcast, Joe Wise and Rachel Smith. Joe is a city commissioner for Johnson City, who formerly was mayor. And I think you guys rotate on a schedule, if I'm correct. And then he also owns Wise Property Solutions. And then Rachel Smith, who is a realtor in the Tennessee, Virginia, and North Carolina regions, if you will. And so welcome aboard. Let's start off with right off the bat, home prices in the area, because I've noticed in the past 8 years, there was some graphic I saw the other day that they've almost doubled, not quite. And first of all, just thoughts from either of you. What's causing that? I mean, obviously, people from outside of Tennessee moving here, but is that the only thing causing that? And what are your thoughts?
Well, I would say I don't know that it's doubled. I know we just went through a reappraisal in Washington County, and the appraisal number came in about 68%. And that's a 5-year number. So the 2023 versus 2018 appraisals showed an appreciation of about 68%. Where the growth exceeded that average was at the lower half of the price point. So homes under a couple $100,000 saw appreciation greater than 68%, and homes, and these are on average, homes at the higher end maybe didn't quite appreciate at 68%. That we know. I mean, that's you can pull property cards and see those. Um, what has driven that? My sense is we had a decade where we didn't do much home building. From 2008 to 2018, what new subdivision was developed, what new homes were built. And so we had this decade where, sure, there were spotty, a house built here, cul-de-sac finished in a subdivision there, but there wasn't anybody proposing large scale development, 100 homes, 200 homes. And so it's sort of a lost decade. And I would suggest to you, it's not that different than, say, the 1930s and early 40s, when you went through a Great Depression and a World War. And then all of a sudden, it's not like people stopped forming families and households. All of a sudden, you have this huge demographic that all of a sudden wants to buy houses all at once. They've delayed it for whatever reason, and now they're coming to the market, and that has had a huge impact. Now, absolutely, we've become the no longer best kept secret. And so when you're making great places to move lists in the Wall Street Journal and USA Today, and I don't remember who all's lists, that is a contributing factor. But I think we're too quick to suggest it's folks that are moving here. That's a factor, but it is not, in my view, the primary factor.
All right, and before Rachel jumps in, the stat I looked at again, I should break. I don't have a crack team here behind me pulling sources up, but it was 8 year versus the 5. So I would again, it's definitely not
Okay.
doubled, but
Hmm.
I would probably be a little higher than the 68%. So let's say 70ish or a little higher. So
Sure.
maybe not quite double, but that's anyway. Yeah, so that's fine. Rachel, what are your thoughts as one who's selling the houses? What say you?
Yeah, so there's definitely a supply issue, definitely in like your 300 and under range. And I've noticed like those homes have definitely um, appreciated more than your higher price range, just because there's more buyers. For example, I had a client who bought a home in October of 2021 and they sold it in August of 2022 and didn't do a thing to it, and they walked away with $30,000. So that's less than a year with major appreciation. So yeah, there's definitely supply issue, um, but
As
ton of
far as
homes
well,
built
as
now.
far as folks moving into town, and as far as clients of yours, and you were telling me before we started recording how busy you were. If you want to mention that too, but like what? Well, I guess if your client list, what's your mix?
So I mostly work with investors and first time home buyers. So really experienced and very inexperienced clientele. Um, So I've had about 20 closings this year and I have 25 listings at the moment and a handful of buyers. So got people all over the place. And most of the first time home buyers that I work with are doing the 0% down loans, which is a huge advantage because prices are so high.
All right. Well, I also want to talk about, so I guess we mentioned a part of this is people moving here, and then part of it's probably pent up demand. But as far as, again, we could talk about infrastructure and all of that too, but what infrastructure problems do you guys see, or that kind of thing? Because I noticed, like, I obviously our roads here, I'm from Michigan originally, which I feel conflicted on this episode because it's supposed to be like, the boots on the ground for locals feel, and I feel like a local. I've been here 8 years, but I'm also from Michigan, so I transplanted here before it was cool, if you will. But I did notice the roads there, you usually have like at least 2 lane, or if you do have a lane, you have a huge shoulder. The roads are a lot wider. Here it's obviously narrow, twisty, turny, and then you got like train tunnels and all these things. So infrastructure wise, it's far easier to build in Michigan. So have you guys noticed anything on the infrastructure side, and is it keeping up, or I guess where are we at with that?
The
Well,
main thing I've seen is with the roads. I know everybody that I grew up with just complains about how much traffic there is now. And when you go to a bigger city, the traffic here is still like nothing compared to that. But there is quite a bit more, every time I drive into the office, I'm like, there's a lot of traffic today, but it's just the normal thing now.
In 26 does move usually pretty well, other than there's always an accident off the gray exit like every day. But other than that, it moves well. What do you think, Joe?
well, I think there are a couple different things going on, and I actually want to put a pin in something that Rachel said a minute ago about investor buyers. So let's not lose sight of that. But to the infrastructure and road question, um, we don't have enough what I would call kind of north-south routes through town. Now, 26 technically is an east-west route, but it functions more north-south inside Johnson City. And so I think if you looked at the traffic count and went out to north of town, beyond the gray exit, and did a traffic count out there, and then did a traffic count in town, and then compared it to beyond Okolona Road, the traffic on 26 probably doubles in terms of volume in town. And what that means is you have people trying to get from the mall to Boones Creek or from downtown to the mall, and are often relying on 26 to make that trip because we don't have a lot of other real viable options for making what amount to a 2, 3, 4 mile trip. Um, you mentioned the railroad tunnel. That is absolutely a constrictor point in that north-south, and it's been prioritized for years. The city has really been kind of leaning in on that project, but it's a project of a size and scale that's going to require involvement from the TDOT folks because we're talking about a sizable investment. So we've been buying right of way out there around the railroad tunnel between Mizpah Hills and Lowe's for years, and most of that's pretty well done. The design phase, you're working with the railroads, so it's always going to be a little bit more bureaucratic and complicated than just something we can do on the side. But with that said, there are 3 phases of that project. There's the state of Franklin over the railroad track, the Mizpah Hills out to Boones Creek, and then I believe there's a final phase. The second of those phases, the one from Mizpah Hills to Boones Creek, isn't even on the 10-year plan for TDOT. Now, we are in the 10-year plan. 10 years is still a long time to get over the railroad track. So that'll get us part of the way there, in that you'll eliminate that stop and wait to go under a single lane 1908 bridge or tunnel. But you're still going to find a road on the other side of the railroad track that's going to constrict down to an old county road until the second part of that gets funded at the TDOT level. I believe that will probably do more to relieve pressure on 26 than any other single thing we do, because there are a lot of people who live in neighborhoods off Boones Creek Road who work at, let's say, the Med Center or ETSU or the VA. What are they doing? They're driving down Boones Creek Road, they're getting on 26, and then they're going back into town. If we could redirect them on Knob Creek Road, lots of cars wouldn't need to be on 26.
Well, and I just think too, when you take out one bottleneck, you can create another. Obviously, like you're saying, because like you get the bridge, or not the bridge, the tunnel out of the way, but then then you're gonna bottleneck somewhere else. So that's interesting that like all of these are still so long out. And then of course, again, I know you said people moving here is a small part of the problem, but as our population continues to grow, that's gonna only be more pronounced, if you will.
And problem may not be the right word. I mean, let's not
Well,
lose
healthy
sight of the fact,
problems.
right? Let's say, 6 years ago, we had negative population growth as a region. People have, I think, forgotten that in 2016 and 17, we were talking about the fact that regionally, this wasn't true in Johnson City or Washington County, we had very small population growth, 1 or 2%. But if you looked at Unicoi, Carter, Hawkins, Johnson, Sullivan counties, and you added it all up as a region, we were losing people year over year. And, from an economic standpoint, that can become disastrous if all of a sudden, you want to talk about what happens to home prices. Let's talk what happens when your population is shrinking 2 or 3% a year.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I like it. Well, obviously, systems thinking and all of that. Like whatever you do, if you grow, there's going to be healthy problems. We won't call them health problems. We'll call them
Right.
challenges, or to be, I don't know. And then of course, if you go the other way, then they're more like the problems you don't want. So, okay, I totally get you there. Rachel, we mentioned the institute or the investors. What investors are you working with, or what are they buying? Because that's obviously the concern, the investor to family homeowner ratio or whatever. What do you think about that? Or who's investing?
Yes, so I work with investors who are buying properties that the average person would not buy. We're talking, so you can get an average person can get up to 4 units on an FHA loan, which is 3.5% down. So first time home buyer loan. So I'm working with people who do 5 units and up, people who are buying mobile home parks, and turning them, doing property management with those as well. And also investors who are buying land and putting new double wides in, and then selling the home and land together.
Yeah, I know there's a general sentiment that like, wait, if it's not a homeowner or a single or like a small business buying them, it's there's concern because the thought is, oh, it's an outside corporation that's got billions of dollars. Are you working with smaller
So
companies or?
yes, I definitely on the smaller scale. They're all of them are local people. Um, and yeah, they're buying some of these houses you'd walk into and you'd walk straight out. Those are the properties they're buying.
Yeah, I had a rental once and it was not good for me, but it was a house that I owned, and when I got married, I just was stuck with it. And I did my best to keep that thing up, but it's a challenge. So I
Mhm.
realized the somebody walking into a house and looking at margin and all of that and saying this is just, it's a challenge to get any ROI off of that. Joe, you wanted to circle back to the investor side. What are your thoughts, or what were you
Well,
thinking?
you certainly have seen examples in the last couple of years, or maybe a better way to say it is you've certainly heard stories from people who were trying to buy homes, and they were a more traditional home buyer. They had a mortgage. They were going to get a mortgage, those sorts of things. And a cash buyer kind of sort of getting to the deal faster than they could. And there's certainly some of that. One thing I don't know that folks have really fully acknowledged or grappled with, but when the tax code was changed in 2017, it created a different set of incentive structures around depreciation. And so if a person is trying to manage their tax liability, real estate and the associated depreciation presents some opportunities. But then they have to hold that property for a time to maintain those benefits. And somebody smarter than me could explain all the nuance of what's going on there. But that is certainly a factor too. And I think that may be part of what's driving up the price in the under $300,000 price point, because they're good investments for multiple reasons, for people who aren't going to be a primary occupant.
You did mention earlier too, and again, I don't know as far as out of staters moving in percentage wise what the change is there. It's hard to find some stats on these things, But when I was looking at a house like 2 years ago, like let's say I put a bid on it, somebody from Arizona, California, whatever, would literally buy it before I could even get out there to look at it. And I don't know if that was just the COVID thing only, or if that's normal to have a certain percent. But I even think the house that we ended up in, I was still going against someone from out of state that was like, big money. So I mean, are we? I guess I don't know. We don't have all the numbers here, but do you still think that's an issue? Just as sentiment generally is like out of staters are driving these prices up to at least a certain percentage. So what are you guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that definitely started during COVID when a ton of people were moving here. And obviously, if you're moving from a bigger city, you have more income. So like buying like a house for cash here, it's like a no-brainer because there is going to be double or triple at the time. Um, I had a customer who was a firefighter and he was on a pension in California, and he still got like 80,000 a year on his pension. Like he was retired. It's like that's so we moved here. And so that was a huge thing. But now, I mean, now you're still going up against cash buyers sometimes. It very much depends on where the price is when the house is listed. Because we're seeing like a ton of price reductions right now. Um, but on the new home sales, there still are a lot of sales that are being bought in cash.
Compared, and would you say this is a post-COVID thing, or would this be the norm, or are we still trickling out of COVID as far as like all of the cash buyers from out of state? Like, is that, or was that? I mean, because there's always cash buyers. Like, just
Yeah.
where are you feeling as far as like the amount out there?
Yeah, well, I don't know where these cash buyers came from, but I think it'll continue to be a trend until this is no longer a hot place to move to.
Well, yeah, let's tie into that because Joe mentioned we're in like all of these reports. I don't know if it's U.S. News and World or whatever they are. He'd be more privy to that. How much of that is, I guess, driving people here? Like, are people like, why are we such a hot destination, if you will?
Look outside.
I
I
tried
mean,
to.
look outside.
Well, I know.
It's 70 some degrees today.
Amazing.
We don't have a lot of the natural disasters that occur. We're not going to be affected by hurricanes. We're not going to, tornadoes are a less frequent thing here. Um,
Mhm.
we're within an 8-hour drive of 50% of the US population. We have a level 1 trauma center. We have, you know, kind of, we have medical facilities and medical services here that most of North America would 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 covet. I mean, so I have aging parents that live here and have need to avail themselves of healthcare service. I have a brother that lives in Kansas City and a sister who lives in Raleigh, and they've come and spent time here to help my parents. And the thing they say is, I can't believe this. You can get to every medical appointment in 10 minutes. And then if you're a retiree, like Rachel's example, where you've got a really solid pension, and where's the cash buyer coming from? Well, they're probably selling a house in California or selling a house in Arizona or Cleveland or wherever it is they're moving from, where they had a lot of equity in that house. And at least before some of our prices really went through the roof, if you were selling a relatively modest house in California, you were probably selling $1 million house. And even if you had 50% equity in that house, that made you a cash buyer in Johnson City, potentially. So I think those are all factors driving it. And then, of course, we're beneficial from a tax standpoint. We're a fiscally well-managed state. So from the standpoint of moving here, a lot of potential threats on the economic horizon look differently to you as a prospective buyer. And then we have 4 seasons. I mean, all the things that make it a compelling place to live.
Yeah, I got back into kayaking this year after like a decade off. So I am enjoying the nature, but it is interesting after you live here for a while, then you just kind of get used to it. And then I have to remind myself, yeah, it is amazing here. as far as the natural, beauty and so on. What are your thoughts on? I had one listener who was thinking about high volume housing. What are your thoughts on that as far as temporarily alleviating some of the, especially for the locals that are trying to get a house?
It definitely gives people a place to live, but most of the structures that I see like that, like the D.R. Horton, they've put up a lot of build to rent. So it gives them a place to live, but they don't get to be a homeowner. They don't get to put equity into their property. They're not secure in that home for 30 years or however many years. But yeah, they're building some more apartments in Kingsport and Allendale. That'll be a big development, but
And I guess we could throw condos in there too. I was thinking too with the retirees, like I have a lot next to my house they're going to build on at some point. Whoever owns it, they always like never build, but they're going to.
yeah.
One of the ideas was like flat, simple apartments for like elderly, but it would be more high density because they're retiring, but they don't want it'd be simple builds because you wouldn't need all the stairs or whatever. I guess that could be. It's not super high volume, but
I think that'd be a good solution to the problem. Having condos, you don't have to keep up your yard. You can put them right all together.
So I think you are seeing, I don't know about the Horton being rental occupant. A lot of the Horton communities that I'm aware of do have a high concentration of ownership in them, but I could imagine that there would also be a similarly significant number of rentals. They're a good example. I mean, they're still single family, they're still detached by and large, but um, they are certainly more units per acre than the traditional R1 zone. I think an R1 zone is like one house to a half an acre, whereas if you were to look at most DR Horton homes, they might be 3 homes to a half acre. So still single family, but to your density question, vastly denser in terms of how much dirt each house is requiring. Um, from a city perspective or a city planning perspective, we will always prefer infill development to greenfield development. We will always prefer, let's maximize the use of this 5 acres, this 7 acres, these little donut holes that exist within the city before we go plowing out into 200 acres of farmland outside the perimeter of town, because it's significantly more efficient to deliver service, water, sewer, fire, schools, you name it. All the services we're involved with delivering are going to be more efficiently developed if we can find a way to do infill development. The problem is everybody loves that in concept. Nobody wants that where they are impacted by it at all. And so, for example, we had a request that came before the commission here in the last year, and it was a request for a parcel that could have held 37 units. I mean, if you looked at how was it zoned, maximize the number. Now, the truth is you can almost never hit the maximum allowable because there's usually parking requirements and stormwater requirements and topographical challenges that make it such that, well, yeah, I mean, you could put 37, but they can't have cars, or there's some kind of thing that's going to restrict you. The neighborhood came out forcefully against that, and ultimately it was voted down in a 3-2 vote. And so now it wasn't going to be 37, it was going to be 24, and they increased the parking allowance by 50% over the required number. They would have been condos or townhomes for sale. So these would have been 24 more properties that Rachel could sell to families looking for somewhere to live that they wanted to build equity in. But the neighbors opposed it based on kind of a NIMBY argument, not in my backyard. And one of the challenges around housing prices is housing supply. And one of the challenges around housing supply is the politics of development. And if you want to look at California, people talk about how expensive things are in California. California is expensive because California made itself expensive. They made it so difficult to build houses. They suffocated the supply. And what happens? Prices go up. And so I try to tell folks when we're having these conversations, think about that housing unit that's being proposed at the end of your street or around the corner from your neighborhood or somewhere on your route home, and you're concerned about the impact it's going to have on traffic. Those are all fair questions. But here's a question for you. Could your son or daughter afford to buy a house in Johnson City today? You know, they've finished at university, they've got their first job, they're in their late 20s, and they want to buy a house. And if the answer is no, supply is part of the solution. And I really think that's a significant tension point around meeting that supply piece, is that everybody loves it in theory, but don't do it in my neighborhood.
Well, yeah, personal example, at the end of my road's a cul-de-sac, and of course, it's like, sorry, that's the only flat spot in our neighborhood. So the kids will come down and play on the cul-de-sac, and we don't get a lot of traffic. But if you were to make that a straightaway, you could easily put 30 plus units in the field by our house, but then all of the neighbors would be, yeah, it would not go over well. Like, you know, and so I still think units are going to go there, but at the expense of a cul-de-sac, the argument will be there's other ways in, like by the
Right,
theater or whatever.
right.
But that would still be, I totally get the argument as far as the local politics of it. I do want to talk about, again, I know with the people moving in or what have you, though, have you guys seen in general, what, or job wise, job growth in the area? What are we seeing? Because a few years ago when I interviewed you, Joe, we were talking about this, and I made the case that a lot of it's solopreneurs or like the little entrepreneurs who are like running a business of themselves. Maybe it's like they're making apps, or for, you know, or they're bringing in people as like corporate consultants, but they're not really hiring people like a Crown Labs would. Are you guys seeing anyone coming in this area that wants to, as far as creating jobs that are like more than just within the micropreneur?
I mean, I
Oh,
think
sorry, go ahead, Joe.
you see Crown Labs adding jobs. You see a number of larger industry that have expanded their operational footprint here, and those are actually real jobs, and those are real jobs in places that have hundreds of jobs. You also have employers that have struggled to fill the jobs that they have, and so there are a number of big industries in our area that have that have had actually incentives to do big projects that were going to result in job growth that weren't able to meet their goal because of hiring challenges. There just wasn't a pipeline of available employees to fill what were solid manufacturing jobs. You know, these were not minimum wage jobs. These were legitimate, credible manufacturing jobs that were just proving to be very hard to fill.
Or do you guys have any other things that you want to say? And then I'll ask the question like I thought of it.
Do you want to talk about the changes to buyer agency?
Here, I'll set this up like I thought of it. All right,
Okay,
so
sorry.
all right, so one more question. What are the changes to buyer agency, Rachel? And then Joe can weigh in if he's privy to this. So go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, so some of the changes that have happened is we cannot post compensation on the MLS. So if the seller is offering a buyer's agent compensation, that will not be posted on the MLS or any associated website. And you also cannot tour a home without signing an agreement with a realtor.
Okay, so what are the practical implications of this?
So practical implications. So we'll start with the buyer side. So, obviously you can take a buyer out and sign that rep, say, hey, just sign this and, you know, read over it and we'll go out there. But ideally you want an agent that sits you down and has a consult about 45 minutes long. They're going to go over the whole buying process and they're going to give your options for agency. You can do unrepresented designated agent, not unrepresented, sorry, non-exclusive designated agent. You can do exclusive designated agent, or you can do facilitator. They're going to give you those options, and then they also have to put their fee in there. So that can be a percentage or a dollar amount. It's whatever you two agree upon. And that fee will be in there, and you'll sign it, and then you'll go tour a property, but you will not know if the seller is offering to pay for that fee until you submit an offer. Before you submit your offer, you'll know, like you'll get a compensation agreement if the seller is offering a compensation. So at that point, your buyer's going to know, will they have to pay this out of pocket, or is it going to be covered, or it's just another piece to add into negotiations during the offer process.
Well, I guess what's the reason for it?
It is supposed to increase transparency.
Okay, as far as the buying and selling of the house, like as far as, but like you said though, they don't know the fees and all of that, right? So does it
Right.
that not transparent? I don't know.
So,
Again, I
so
don't know much about this, so I'm just thinking out loud, which is scary.
yeah, so it came about when a realtor would post during COVID, I sold a house in 2 minutes. And then the seller was like, well, there was a knowledge gap. Some sellers didn't know that they were paying both the selling agent and the listing agent. So that's really how it came about. And so now the goal is to increase transparency about who is getting paid and from where.
Is this also a part of the way the commission is set? I mean, once upon a time, there was sort of a standard commission and buyers and sellers agents split that. Is this
So
sort of a byproduct of that?
there's actually never been a standard. It's always been negotiable.
Mhm.
But yeah, it just stems from, you know, seller. I don't I don't know a better way to say it than how I previously did.
Well,
But
I just think of this like whenever I was looking at a house, like I just realized that like the agents, I thought there was like a 7% total pool, and then they split it in half, and then the brokers would split that in half or whatever. Are you saying that's not the norm, or
so
yeah?
it seems to be business as usual here. Every one in my office is still advising their seller to offer a buyer's compensation because that puts so much more of a strain if you don't on the buyer. Because most of the time in this market, the buyer's getting their closing costs covered by the seller anyways. So then if they have to pay a commission out of pocket too, that takes a ton of buyers out of the race right there.
I would just be curious to ask Rachel if signing that agreement, like before you can even go show a house, is I could see where, like, what is the person obligating themselves to do? Like, so if I want to see a house and you're going to show it and I sign the contract, does that bind me to work with you as my realtor for some period of time, like it would if I were listing a house with you? Or could I sign that agreement with 5 different realtors and go look at different houses at the same time?
Yeah, so the answer is it depends. There is a non-exclusive designated agency option, which means you can sign an agreement with 4 or 5 different realtors. Um, it just depends on what you can't, I mean, if you look at a house with 2 different agents, the same house, and you sign an agreement with them, both of them, you're gonna have to pay both of them. It don't matter who takes you to the closing table, you gotta pay both of those agents. Um, but there are several different options, like I mean, personally, I like to work with people who are committed to me because I'm committing to them. So personally, I have a full 45-minute consult before we sign anything. And at the end, if they want to work with me, we typically do somewhere between a 3 to 6 month contract, exclusive designated agent. So they're not working with anyone else. I'm just taking care of the process. But some
But so
agents,
you would at least know that. I mean, that would all
yes,
be, those are
they
ground
should
rules
explain
that,
that to you. You should not sign
okay.
anything if it's not
Mm.
explained. Yeah, they should explain that. I know a lot of because I don't work with a lot of online leads. Like your Zillow leads. You know, if you click on Zillow, it's not sending you to the listing agent, it's sending you to the agent who paid for you for your lead. So they'll get your info and they'll call you up. And sometimes in that case, you'll sign a written agreement to show to tour property. And in that one, for example, you would put the address in and say, for this property only, I will take you to the property, and if you want to buy it, I'll represent you.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and I wonder if this ties into because I remember when I to protect the realtor to a degree, there was show me your pre-approval letter before I'll take you to the house, because obviously if you have people calling you all day long and there's like, let's say only 1 out of 50 is, or 20 or whatever, is legitimately looking at a house, that could run you ragged as so like the pre-approval at least says, okay, they're serious.
Yeah.
And so would this help you more with this contract as well? Or is it mutually beneficial?
Well, so I haven't taken a buyer out at all this year without having an agreement in place already. So it doesn't necessarily apply to me, because I think we need to have that consult up front and make sure they know what they're getting into. But it definitely will change things for the agent who gets a call and just jumps in the car and goes and shows a house.
All right. Well, let's wrap this up then. Joe's got he's an important man with things to do, and you got houses to sell,
About
Rachel.
that.
So anyway, I guess take us out, like thoughts, like I don't know if you any I hate to say projections, but what are you guys' thoughts on just Johnson City in general, say over the next 5 years? Like what do you see happening, I guess, like housing wise, or I don't know, just like the success of the city? What do you guys think?
I think from a public standpoint, we have a lot of projects in the pipeline at varying stages of conception, development, planning, et cetera. And so I think really what we're experiencing more than anything, and this is not unique to Johnson City, this is an issue across the country, is a supply problem. And like I said earlier, I think part of that supply problem is a decade after the 07-08 recession, where there really wasn't a lot of development happening in much of the country. And we're no exception to that. And so now when you look around, we have a number of large scale projects, some of them multifamily, denser applications, some of them single family, but all of them are going to result in additional housing units coming online in 2, 3, 5 years. And I think that will significantly impact the pricing and availability. Um, the desirability of Johnson City, I don't think is going to go away. I think the secret is out. This is a great place to live. There's an awful lot of good things happening here. And so that piece of the mix, I don't think is going to change as quickly as it changed to come to be, if that makes sense. Like I don't think there was sort of a light switch that the pandemic created and everybody learned about Johnson City. I don't think somebody's gonna turn that switch off and everybody's gonna be like, forget about it. We're going somewhere else. I think this is going to be a more attractive and vibrant place for people to relocate for all the reasons we've already talked about.
All right, Rachel, you have anything to add?
I agree with all of that. I think our home prices are gonna average like 5 to 6% increase per year, and people are just gonna keep moving in. It's kind of gonna be like this year, how things went this year. I think it'll just keep happening for the next 5 years.
All right, let's hope those mortgage rates go down.
No, be careful. You want to talk about house
Just
prices.
kidding, just
I mean, when
kidding.
the mortgage, I mean, seriously, that's a part of this. Like we're experiencing all this upward price pressure, and it's with historically high interest rates in the recent term. They're not historically significant if you look out over 50 years. But what would happen if mortgage rates were 1.5% or 2% lower?
I could afford my house.
Do you think there's demand now? Wait
Yeah, yeah.
till 25% more buyers can afford the house you're looking at.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, of course there's the personal, I want the mortgage rates to go down for my own
For
good, but I
you,
also,
just for
yeah,
you. Yeah.
just for me. Yeah. So no, that's great. It's well, that's really though. As we close out here, that's one of the things too. When we get into political season, you know, you guys always see the memes online or whatever. I'm on social media too much, but like you see like one little side of it, and it's like, yeah, we can look at mortgage rates, but there's consequences, pros and cons to everything.
Mhm.
Pros and cons to growth. Pros, you know, obviously we want to grow, but obviously you want to grow steady. You don't want to grow too fast, but you also don't want to. So yeah, but of course with mortgage rates, I don't really know what the magic number is. Again, I remember there was a spot when they were like 3%, and then they went up to roughly 7. Again, I don't. And then back in the day, like decades ago, I think they were a lot higher. So I don't really know what the right thing is, but yet that is an excellent point that like just because we want one thing that's going to affect another. Like I love mortgage rates to go down personally, but what would be the effect overall?
Mhm.
But again, for my refi, it'd be great.
Yeah, yeah.
So all
Well,
right,
and
well,
it would be good. That would do more to affect affordability. Honestly, mortgage rates, I mean, that's a part of the affordability mix, and so is supply. If one of them gets too far ahead of the other, you'll have to interview an economist. But the implications of those things, I think, would be significant.